There's a strange moment that happens when you realize a piece of history didn't disappear naturally, because once that thought takes hold, every official explanation you've ever trusted starts sounding rehearsed, and you begin to wonder how many times you've accepted silence as truth simply because it was presented calmly. I didn't arrive at this story by searching for mysteries, and that's important because the most convincing erasures aren't hidden behind locked doors or classified stamps, but buried inside ordinary records that look complete until you notice they all avoid the same detail in exactly the same way. What first caught my attention wasn't what was written, but what stopped being written, because references that had appeared casually for years suddenly vanished, as if someone had decided that even mentioning the subject carried a risk that outweighed curiosity. At first, I told myself this was normal, that time destroys information unevenly, and that history is full of gaps. But that explanation collapsed the moment I realized these gaps weren't random, weren't regional, and weren't gradual, because entire threads were removed simultaneously across sources that had no reason to coordinate unless coordination was the point. That's when the uncomfortable question surfaced, not about what was missing, but about who had the reach, the authority, and the urgency to make something disappear so completely that later generations wouldn't even know what to look for. I won't give you names yet, and I won't give you dates, because the fastest way to escape a disturbing idea is to label it and file it away as something distant, when the truth is that this erasure sits much closer to the foundation of what we're taught than most people would ever be comfortable admitting. What matters right now is the pattern, because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and the pattern begins with brief acknowledgments that fade abruptly, followed by explanations that feel oddly defensive for events that are supposedly insignificant. You start noticing that later historians don't argue against the lost material or explain why it was wrong, but instead write around it, constructing narratives that function perfectly only if you never ask why certain questions were never raised in the first place. That behavior is subtle, but it's also revealing, because disagreement leaves evidence, while erasure leaves silence, and silence is far more expensive to maintain over time. Somewhere in this process, history stops feeling like a record of what happened and starts feeling like a controlled version of what was allowed to survive. And once that shift occurs, even the most trusted timelines begin to feel provisional. The detail that finally made it impossible for me to ignore wasn't dramatic, and that's what made it frightening, because it was a simple cross-reference that should have existed, but didn't, repeated often enough that coincidence stopped being a reasonable explanation. When you realize that something has been removed so thoroughly that you were never meant to know it was missing,